justice, and the American way. We are the Voices of Dissent.
Welcome back to the Voices of Dissent. We have a special guest, Sharyl Attkisson, with us today, a former CBS reporter. She has written a book called Stonewalled, My Fight for Truth Against the Forces of Obstruction, Intimidation, and Harassment in Obama's Washington. Now, Sharyl, you have alleged that government agencies have hacked into your computer systems, your private and work electronics. Tell us how you found out about that and if we actually know who the hackers were.
It came to my attention. I had some sort of electronic anomalies and problems with my systems, but I certainly didn't think the government was surveilling me until I did have a couple of government-connected sources tell me that there was visual monitoring going on of private citizens and possibly journalists. And this was before that was confirmed by news of what happened to the Associated Press and to the Fox News reporter and James Risen and so on. So it sounded a little far-fetched at first, but I was able to, through my sources, get my CBS Toshiba laptop that I used at home examined by an expert, and the forensics show that there was a sophisticated, ongoing effort to monitor and surveil my computers, which they had the ability to, according to the forensics, watch everything from keystrokes to exfiltrating files to activating my audio on Skype so that they could listen to things. Getting into the CBS system, it was quite extensive.
Well, that's horrifying.
Yeah, Sharyl, first and foremost, let me just say thank you for having the courage and the integrity to step up and try to actually do your job. One of the biggest disappointments for me in all this is I look at you blowing the cover on one of the biggest stories of our entire lifetime. To me, this is Watergate on steroids. This is unbelievable. The government is actually interfering in the media, and at the same time, the media is sitting there working double time to try to cover for the regime. It just amazes me that the prostitutes out there, instead of being very interested in getting to the bottom of this and going after the White House, instead seem to want to attack you. Has that been a disappointment for you?
I haven't read a lot of the attacks. I guess I have sort of selective attention. I've received a great deal of support, including from some colleagues. And I will tell you behind the scenes, many colleagues are sharing similar observations. They are very concerned. At investigative reporting conferences, this has been a topic of conversation for the last couple of years. But our problem is we haven't reported it, in my opinion, as the news story that it is. And therefore, we haven't done much about it. And you're right. Many other journalists are either too conflicted or perhaps too comfortable in their position or too fearful to take on this issue, and they'd rather, some of them are nothing more than an arm or surrogate for the administration. They certainly would rather act in the defense of what's happened rather than, expose it.
A number of other journalists have mysteriously at young ages wound up passing away. Andrew Breitbart, Michael Hastings, Larry Bowen. Critics of the administration seem to fall into ill health or car accidents or plane crashes or what have you. The media right now, the corporate media, the Obama media, is attempting a character assassination. But again, to your point, I don't think it's going to work because your history, your integrity, your track record is so impressive. Do you have any concerns about your physical well-being if you're able to be successful in alerting the public to what's going on?
I really don't, because here I am saying what I'm saying, and I think the people responsible for doing what they did, I see them as bullies and cowards, and that doesn't scare me. That just makes me angry.
Bring them out into the light of day.
Yeah, these are people that don't have confidence in their own abilities to defend themselves or make their own case, so they have to turn to surreptitious tactics and, like I say, bully people. That's the stuff of cowards.
Yeah.
Right. We have a First Amendment in this country, and it totally preserves and protects the right of the media to do their job. It seems to me that in your situation, it points out we have two situations going on. One is the corporate media has no interest whatsoever in being critics of the administration, talking truth to power. They have no interest in that at all. It seems instead they want to tell lies to the public. And then on the other hand, we have a government that's willing to totally disregard any restraints it has and interfere with the media. Do you think that there's still a free press left in this country?
I think it's in some cases beginning to look a lot like the press in other countries where they don't have the same freedoms. And I visited some of those countries in the last couple of years. And when I hear the locals complain or discuss what the press does there, I've been thinking to myself, that's what's happening where we are. You know, they don't want to go awry of the government, or the government threatens retaliation in terms of lack of access. And then the press willingly, we're not being forced to, we willingly report unquestioningly press releases and things from the government that in many cases are wrong without asking for the documentation, even though it's public documentation that would prove it. We allow them to withhold freedom of information material from us. Right now, as you know, the president exerted executive privilege to withhold some Fast and Furious documents. It's now being ordered under court to turn some of that material over, and descriptions in that material are emails where they're discussing my news articles about Fast and Furious. Why did the President of the United States have to step in to keep that material secret? I don't know, but I think that's not, normal in a normal free press society.
You know, the Fast and Furious, Operation Fast and Furious is one of the governmental programs that sends me to the moon. It angers me to no end. You are a torchbearer for the investigation regarding Fast and Furious. And we had a massive document dump on Tuesday, the day of the election. Did you get anything in there? I mean, was there anything in any of those documents? Is any of it even usable?
The documents were not provided to me. They were provided to the congressional committee that subpoenaed them, and I haven't had access to them yet. But of course, I've certainly been asking them about it. So I hope at some point to be able to go through them. But there's so many pages, and of what they turned over, they're still withheld another huge group of them. They gave a catalog of 15,000 documents that they had withheld, which was 2/3 more than they had ever turned over. And that doesn't reflect what the law is supposed to do and what President Obama said he was all about, which is erring on the side of releasing this information, not withholding it, in light of the fact that, there's public interest in this material. Clearly, they're not doing that. They're withholding almost everything you ask for when you ask for public information.
Is there public information, and is the public actually interested? You have participated in a wide range of investigations that I don't mean this to this isn't disparaging. It's just that's gotten no traction. And I know to Ric's point about the media bias. Do any of these scandals have any traction? I mean, are they ever going to stick and actually the American public stand up and say, wait a minute, we're doing what?
Well, I do think I think all of the ones I've paid attention to have gotten a great deal of traction. And I'll look at, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but they've been...
No, please, go ahead.
At the same time, they've been controversialized by the interests who feel attacked. Of course, they're going to controversialize me in the stories, and yet independent peer journalists have awarded those same stories and recognized them nationally and internationally with Emmy Awards and Emmy nominations and Edward R. Murrow Awards in every instance. So I don't think it's not that they have traction, it's just that the press allows itself to be manipulated and used as a tool too often, convinced that, through a PR strategy campaign that these are phony scandals. That's the PR strategy I discuss in the book that has been somewhat effective for this administration. They basically claim when the facts get too damaging that the reporters conflicted and the story's a Republican phony scandal. I think people need to see through that. A lot of people do. But once you read the book, those who are interested, you'll start to recognize other tactics that are regularly used to distract us from the goings-on. And it reminds me of another society, like being in Russia, when the government and its surrogates, like Media Matters, are calling the agenda and successfully able to convince the press to controversialize a story. I noticed so many times the press would try hard not to cover a story. And the ground-level reporters, by the way, wanted to sometimes. So it's the gatekeepers higher up that are stopping it. But they would controversialize a story and not cover it. But as soon as a defense came up or a story came out promulgated by the administration, they would jump in the story only to discredit it. And that was so telling to me. And then they would readily accept the evidence of the discrediting, no matter how false it was, without checking anything, versus never going after the government with the same skepticism that they go after those who question the government. It's very topsy-turvy.
Yeah, Sharyl, one of the things that shocks me is we have whistleblowers from the NSA who say 80% of all phone traffic and 100% of all cell phone traffic is monitored by the NSA. They're tracking you everywhere on the internet. They're sitting there intruding into your life in all sorts of different ways. It's getting to the point where it feels like the regime knows everything about us, but we're getting to the point where we know nothing at all about the regime. Because when we ask for information on the things they're doing, they're saying that's none of your business. Leave it up to the experts in government. We will take care of everything. Stop asking any questions. And it seems like the corporate media is perfectly happy with it. And like you said, instead of questioning and challenging the government and doing their watchdog role, they're the lapdog for government. And instead, they're the attack dog to anyone who does question government. We've had massive consolidation in this country in the media. In 1983, it took 50 companies to constitute 90% of the media information consumed by Americans. Today, 6 companies produce 90% of the information consumed. With this consolidation, if you have 6 people who run those 6 companies who don't want questions asked to the government, they have
you're not going to get them.
They have the ability to shut it down throughout the entire process. Like you said, the frontline person is all ears about why are you doing this fast and furious, but the executives higher up who answer to one of those 6 top people who run all those organizations, they have the ability to squash everything. Do you think that in this age of massive media consolidation that we're losing some of the intangibles of a true free press as we wind up having just a few people control all the information?
Yes, and I talk about the corporatization of news and the obligation that the corporation has to do a fiduciary and to serve a fiduciary interest, meaning it may be their obligation to try to stop a news story that feels could be damaging to an advertiser, and yet that conflicts with the mission of the news division, which is not to be interfered with. And these two things sometimes come into play. And I agree with you about the consolidation. I didn't know those figures, but that entirely makes sense. And I think it's a sad time, because if we wouldn't allow that to happen, if we as journalists would stand up against it, I really think it wouldn't be able to accomplish it. But too often we really don't want to buck the bosses. We're comfortable in our jobs. Sometimes we may agree with the decisions to sort of self-censor a story, so maybe we just don't say enough about it. But there are a lot of great journalists, and I know this from my colleagues working on Fast and Furious, for example, who wanted to report that story and could not get it past their editors. And I heard that refrain, over and over again. So I do think it's not all journalists, but there is a problem across the board.
Now, Sharyl, you've been a reporter for over 30 years. Has the government become progressively more secretive and more difficult for you to actually cover throughout the last 3 decades?
In my opinion, yes, but that's because we've allowed it. I think that government, from what I've learned, seeks to gain power and perpetuate itself, and for whatever reason, it sees itself almost like a corporation, separate and apart from the people, rather than serving the people's interests. The idea that it keeps all this information secret and tells you to stop asking questions shows you that they don't even understand they work for you. They're being paid public tax dollars to serve our interests, but they hold information as though there's some sort of private company that has PR agents working with them serving their bosses. It's a twisted dynamic, but I blame the media for allowing that to happen and not raising objections more fervently over time as they've dialed back on what they allow us to do, and they've come to dictate the terms of news coverage more and more.
Well, they've come to dictate the terms of the news coverage. They've taken the American people's interests off the table and replaced it with the government's interest. And every one of your high-powered bureaucrats in the government is out to protect him and his turf. They're full-time equivalents. You're measured in the government by how many FTEs you have under your command or at your disposal or whatever you want to call that. And so they've developed a way to perpetuate their little fiefdom.
Well, I'll give you one little example of something we let go. When I was covering Fast and Furious, at one point they called a news conference. I tell a fuller story in the book about it, but the Justice Department was having a briefing, and I was on my way over, and I was told by the Justice Department spokeswoman, she called and said, "Don't bother to come. We're not going to clear you to get in the building." Now, they control security because of terrorism, for example.
Sure.
They know I'm not a terrorist, but they use the control they have over the federal buildings to bar reporters they don't like so that they can choose the reporters who cover their story. That's entirely inappropriate.
Entirely.
And I ran over to my bureau chief's office and I said, "Listen, they're going to try to keep me out of this briefing, and they can't rightfully keep me out of a federal building that we own to cover a story. They can't choose who covers them." And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, yeah, what are you going to do now? The press conference has already started. I argue we should be screaming and kicking when that happens and getting together with the other bureau chiefs and making sure they don't do that in the future. But I just found very little interest in pushing back against that sort of control.
Well, okay, so as you look across the landscape and the scandals that have afflicted this administration, whether it be Benghazi or Fast and Furious or whatever, many of those scandals and the treatment that you just received, the completely inappropriate way they operate, all of that seemed to have been changed in October with the advent of the Ebola virus. I don't know that anything scared the administration until Ebola came around, and they couldn't put a lid on that. Now, I think through biology and through the world kind of, the virus has not escaped and infected, and it has not become a zombie apocalypse. But as you look back across the landscape, nothing has really ever seemed to bother the administration. But that one kind of got to them, and they were on damage control, and it was out of control for at least 8 days or so. Did you get that kind of read off of that too? The Ebola scandal, the Ebola virus it seemed to scare them. It seemed to be a game changer.
I would argue that there have been moments like that, and I discussed in the book, for example, healthcare.gov. I was assigned to cover that story. I wasn't seeking it out, but 3 weeks in, there was a sense that maybe we were not giving it the coverage that we ought to, and that we ought to dig into it more. And that story terrified the administration, in my opinion.
Okay.
And they hired, after a month or so of really media coverage that was fair, but very hard, but accurate about what was going on, and us digging for secrets and them trying to withhold material and being proven to have given incorrect testimony to Congress and so on. All of a sudden, they hire a couple of PR people, your tax dollars at work, and the light switch went off. And I described the same process with several stories. They loved Fast and Furious before the light switch went off. They assigned me to cover Benghazi and loved those stories until the light switch went off. And it's almost as if they're able to, I don't really know what goes on behind the scenes at that level, but it's almost as if they're able to make a call and stop, at some point when a story is getting to be that damaging. And I think Ebola was a similar trajectory. They were very concerned about that because that's one thing that, like you say, transcended political interests. A lot of people got worried about that. And yes, I did sense a bit of panic and disarray because they didn't have a consistent message, and everybody recognized that even within the administration. I don't know that that's over. I've been told there's going to be a difficult flu season ahead for us with some Ebola-related issues. At least that's what health officials think. But, yeah, I do sense that concern them deeply.
Shar, you mentioning, I don't know what happens up at those very high levels in terms of making a determination of what stories can go forward. Walter Cronkite wrote about that in a foreword to a book back in the 90s, talking about how there was powerful men far outside the newsroom who basically confined what stories could and couldn't be talked about. And again, with the corporate consolidation, where you have 6 people basically who have gotten a permission from the government to consolidate, where they control almost all the information, are we finally reaching an apex, an intersection, where if we look at how the entire media all works together as a single organism, from company to company to company, on stories like the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin, or the Ferguson, Missouri, where there is a narrative provided to the public that is just drummed down with a ferocious passion, and it turns out the description that was provided by the media isn't just inaccurate, it's 180 degrees the opposite of what really kind of happened. And yet the media never dials back and says, oops, we were wrong about that, or, well, we're going to behave ourselves. Instead, they just keep charging forward and disregarding anything that disagrees with their narrative. Have we reached that point where we, the public, just cannot reasonably trust the mainstream corporate media?
As I like to say, I think you do have to watch the news, and not just the news, but the images you're presented with every day, billboards, social media, with the idea that somebody, a paid interest, a cloaked paid interest, may be behind that imagery, trying to manipulate your viewpoint in a certain direction. And I really believe that's the case more often than people know. There's a reason a story is on the news many times, or a reason it's kept off that has nothing to do with the value of it or the story itself. There are fake AstroTurf campaigns that utilize social media like Twitter, Facebook, surrogates like Media Matters, Wikipedia editors to try to create, as you say, that narrative and make people think it's pervasive and that if you don't feel that way, you're an outlier, when in fact, they're the outliers. It's very twisted, and there's a whole cottage industry in Washington, a PR industry, that is paid and set up to embark upon these strategies and manipulate public opinion. So back to your question, I do think people need to watch the media images they see and start being a little more skeptical about them. I don't have the answer to tell them how to know what interest is behind every story, but I just think they should begin to think of it in those terms and seek out sources they learn to trust on certain stories. There are plenty out there. It may be the Center for Public Integrity or ProPublica or Project Censored or looking for Sharyl Attkisson's work when I write for whoever I write for. But I think people have to just seek out their own trusted sources.
Well, Sharyl, you mentioned surrogates like Media Matters, and when I Googled your name, one of the first things that came up was a Media Matters article. With the headline "Sharyl Attkisson changes hacking story again." Why does the media really want to? The First Amendment is there to protect the media from being infringed upon by the government. Why is it in this media organization's best interest to feed us lies and to discredit the truth?
Well, Media Matters isn't a media organization in the sense I think those who don't do their research may think it is. It's the same thing as its right-wing counterparts. They call themselves media watchdogs, but they're opinion groups. But for some reason, the media treats them as though they're some sort of neutral media outlet. They're closely connected with Hillary Clinton, the Obama administration. They worked in direct concert with the Obama administration on controversies to put out their propaganda, often false and misleading. It's amazing that the press allows itself to be manipulated and used as a tool and isn't more critical. And I discussed that. Few people who've interviewed me who didn't read the book but certainly took the page of their questions off Media Matters talking points without even being embarrassed or knowing enough to be embarrassed by the notion of how they were being manipulated and used. And I don't want to be rude, but I feel like saying, please turn to page 344 in my book. This is all foretold. Also, I would point out, I talk about these AstroTurf campaigns. Media Matters, how do you think it is that anything they write turns up top in search engine results when you Google something? They're able to somehow have their material placed, and I think...
Would Google be one of the six?
I don't know. You tell me. But they have a way to have their material highly returned, so that even when they write stuff I think they know is just so blatantly false, they hope to become part of the skewing and manipulation of a public opinion because they know the article will show up when people do a simple search. And again, that's something people have to be savvy to. Many are, but it's discussed in the book, that whole strategy.
Yeah, Sharyl, as far as the six major media conglomerates, they don't consider Google or Facebook as part of that. The interesting thing is, if you look at who owns Google, the predominant owners, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. You've got Bob Iger at Disney. You've got Sumner Redstone with Viacom, CBS. You've got one extremely liberal person, Brian Roberts with NBC Universal. You've got all of them, except for Rupert Murdoch at News Corp. Every single one of those people who control almost everything that goes before our eyeballs are fantastically, extremely liberal. And yet the public doesn't know that. And to your point, the media, which is controlled almost 100% by people who are radical extreme leftists, they will use very liberal entities and say, oh, the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, oh, this group and that group, oh, they're just moderate kind of middle-of-the-road authoritative sources. They don't have any particular axe to grind. Media Matters, Snoops, these are all just, kind of your basic, very creditable sources. Well, of course they would think so, since they want to pull the country to the left. And so for someone like you who just wants to do your job, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, you just want to report the facts. And as H.L. Mencken said, journalism is telling things that powerful people don't want told. Everything else is just press release. Is there any hope that some of your colleagues will take your fighting spirit to tell the truth and move away from press release journalism and actually start to tell the truth about things the administration doesn't want put out there?
I don't think mainstream journalism as we've known it is going back to what it ever used to be, if it ever was something very different. I think something new will be born of this. I don't know what the paradigm will be, but I think something will come of it, and you'll be able to get good journalism. It's just not going to be, very few people watch evening news anyway right now. People will not sit down and watch a half-hour newscast and be spoon-fed what they get. But one more observation I think is interesting. The people who question me, and I don't mind receiving skeptical questions. I get it. I understand. I can answer them, even though I'm not a public official or federally, paid by federal tax dollars. But they will accept these so-called journalists unquestioningly, with no documentation, supposed experts and claims and alleged contradictions that they get from the likes of Media Matters, with a proven track record of false information and a partisan history, and yet not ask them any skeptical questions, nor will they ever ask the government, which has a track record of providing false information on many of these controversies. But they question me with this, ferocity and intensity that they would never dream of applying to the people I think it really should be applied to. And again, they don't even know enough to be embarrassed by that. They don't even understand or see the inconsistency in that behavior.
Well, that's why when we opened up, we called you a patriot, because that it takes a lot to stand there and take that scrutiny and that abuse and that and that venom. It takes a lot of professional courage to do that, and we applaud your courage for that. We applaud your courage for being on the front line of all of the scandals, whether, the news coverage on Benghazi, Fast and Furious. I mean, you've been on the front lines to butt heads with the administration on many occasions, and we thank you for that. It's a true testament to your courage.
Well, I want people to think about what's happening and be concerned about it, that there are entire groups of media and quasi-media that operate under the dictum. They've been manipulated to operate under the dictum. Don't question authority. Question those who question authority. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening right now, and that should be very concerning to people.
One of the things that just completely dovetails to that, the Osama bin Laden killing. I see at the headline of every newspaper, Osama bin Laden is killed. Osama bin Laden was killed in daring raid. Osama bin Laden. So I sit there and I think, so Osama bin Laden's been killed, okay, and the media's got independent verification of this and so on and so on. And then I say, okay, so, where's his body? Oh, they chucked it in the ocean. Okay, well, did they take pictures? Yes, they did. And they'll be coming out just shortly. Okay, and then Scott Brown and two other senators are shown pictures by CIA agents, which later on they turn out and say, well, no, they were doctored photos. Why are you showing U.S. senators doctored photos? Well, okay, we're going to release the photos next month. Actually, the Department of Defense just came out. We never did take pictures. So you kill the most wanted man in the world. You chuck him in the ocean. You didn't do DNA testing. You didn't do anything. You got his wife and his daughter, but then no, you don't have his wife. Well, maybe then you don't have his daughter. The story changed so many times that Leon Panetta said, any CIA official who comments to the media again is in risk of losing his pension. And all this while, we still have never seen the photos. Well, of course, now they say there weren't any photos taken. The story's changed 100 times. And what evidence were we ever provided other than a picture of a group of politicians sitting in a room? We were never showed anything other than that. And the story changed and changed and changed. And yet not one media outlet, in the absence of any evidence, zero evidence, they didn't report. Today, the State Department or the Department of Defense or the Obama administration reported that Osama bin Laden had been killed in Pakistan. No, it was never reported that way. It was, today, Osama bin Laden was killed. Why do you think we've reached the point where it is almost like in the Soviet Union, a mouthpiece for the government, where instead of saying, okay, that's great, you killed him, we're so happy, okay, just give us the verification. So, how dare you ask for the verification? You kook! You don't just trust the government. Anything they say, you don't just believe what they tell you. How do you think we've gotten to this point where the reporters, instead of doing their job, have just become a mouthpiece for the government?
I wish I had the answer, but I've made similar observations about other stories. Every story that was born of Fast and Furious that was proven false. The government said the whistleblowers were liars. Then they said, okay, they're not liars, but because it was proven they weren't. They were acting alone in Phoenix. Nobody else knew. Then it was proven, okay, they knew at headquarters, but Justice Department didn't know about Fast and Furious. Then it was learned Justice Department knew well of Fast and Furious, but they said nobody in the White House heard of it. Then the documents show same thing. And I say in the book, with each new generation, with each evolution of one previously false story proven false, people would look at me, my colleagues, and say, why don't you accept this story? Here's what the government says. Like, every time, happily and willingly to accept the newest government iteration of their story, which was also then later proven false. And I'm thinking, who are you? What are you thinking?
Which one was I supposed to believe?
Yeah, that happened with healthcare.gov. I mean, there's a changing, evolution of stories and a process that these things go through once their stories are revealed false and new ones come to light, and yet the press acts as though none of that ever happened. The government's telling the truth. We don't need proof. I find the same thing, that you described.
Oh, and it's extremely frustrating to us. We see these stories often, frequent. We talk about them on the show. That's the whole point of the show, is the Voices of Dissent. We want to identify that. We want to bring it out to the light. We call that tyranny around here.
Yeah, and Sharyl, one of the things that's, again, so amazing in all this is that those who do question the government say, well, wait a minute, you said that this had happened, and then you changed your story, and you said that I'm a total crazed kook if I didn't believe your first story, but now your story has totally changed something different, and now you're saying I'm a crazed kook if I don't believe your second story, and then your third story, and your fourth story, and your fifth story. How is it that these people can be so malleable? Do you think it's just simply a matter of the paymaster? It was famously
follow the money?
quoted. It's famously quoted. It's very hard to convince a man that to understand something when his job depends on him not understanding it. Do you think with all the cutbacks in the newsrooms that it's created an environment of intimidation to those people who really do want to do their job to not understand what they're not supposed to understand?
I think there's an element of that, but I would just say, even more so in my experience, there are true believers. There are gatekeepers in the process that I think just really believe the government. Why are you questioning them? What's wrong with you? Why can't you get on board? You're crazy if you think the government's not telling the truth. I mean, it used to be, I say in the book, the greatest skepticism should be reserved for the powers that be, and yet it's applied to, in many cases, the poor whistleblowers who are giving up their careers and sometimes their lives to draw attention to something. The media will attack them now with the ferocity that perhaps they ought to be applying again to the government that's accused of wrongdoing, but instead it goes to the people that question the authorities. It's very twisted.
It is very twisted.
If we've reached that point where, because of ideological bias, again, if you have a certain ideological point of view, you're probably not going to get hired in the newsroom in the first place, and they're certainly going to want to get rid of you as quickly as possible. If you're not going to comport to that, if you're not going to champion the voice of government over the voice of the powerful over the powerless, have we reached that point where we've got to start to look to what is frequently called the alternative news sources, frequently internet and things like that? And then is a true journalist, because I feel that you would go after Obama administration, the Bush administration. You are just out there doing your job, and you didn't get the memo that, oh, hey, yes, we're attack dogs for Bush, but oh my goodness, not now Obama. We're supposed to be running interference for him and covering for him. So you're a true journalist. So something that someone like me would be very interested in is, first off, do you think that we probably do need to start relying on the internet media more, number one? And number two, more particularly, where do you go from here as somebody who truly has earned credibility as a real journalist?
Well, thank you for that question. I think that you're right. The internet has opened up a lot of possibilities. A story can't be entirely censored now by big players because you'll find it somewhere on the internet. But, that can be fraught with peril, as we know, because it's being covered by bloggers and people who don't have the mission of journalists necessarily, and they serve a purpose. But I think the public is thirsty for a news source, a traditional-ish news source that they can just believe and not have to discount because it was found on a conservative site or a liberal site. As for me, I've just decided in the short term, I'm contributing to outlets who've asked me case by case, as long as they allow the story to go to its natural place, rather than telling me who I have to interview and kind of changing the conclusions and shaping it unnaturally. That's my big caveat when I'm doing stories now, and I've had a great deal of success finding outlets. I don't know if people will find all the stories. Some of them have been very widely distributed on outlets like Sinclair Media, which has more local news viewers than all of the networks combined, so some of that's been highly circulated. And then I've written for little sites such as BlueForceTracker.com, which has a military-related audience, but that's a great site started by an acquaintance. And I'm just looking for outlets where I can do, some great reporting that people will let see the light of day. even if it's something the big players might not want to air.
We've been visiting with Sharyl Attkisson. You can check out more about her story by reading her book, Stonewalled, My Fight for Truth Against the Forces of Obstruction, Intimidation, and Harassment in Obama's Washington. Thank you so much for joining us, Sharyl. We look forward to reading your next story.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Keep up the hard work.
Yes, and thank you for service to our country, like people who put on the uniform and serve our country in the same way, you, by exposing the lies and the dishonesty of the government against all forces in opposition to you, you have also been in service to our country. So, ma'am, thank
Absolutely.
you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharyl.
Truth, justice, and the American way. We are the voices of dissent.